Heads up, the following podcast contains adult language and deals with adult subjects. Keep this in mind as you listen.
Today we're following up on questions and comments sent in by you, our listeners. Our favorite thing.
On with the show.
Hey folks, I'm Grace.
And I'm James. Welcome to Fundamental Shift, the podcast where we explore the major shakeups in our lives, their fault lines, and aftershocks.
Thanks for joining us. Let's get our shift together.
We'd like to let everyone know we're about to launch a new segment to give everyone an opportunity to get involved and interact online. Keep an ear out for it. It'll be dropping the week before Thanksgiving, and there will be a special hashtag for you to post content.
Well, by now, y'all probably have figured out that our very favorite thing is interacting with you, our listeners. Since the first 4 episodes about our backgrounds, we've had some other follow-up questions and comments come in, and we'd love to respond to those today. So let's just jump right in.
Let's do it. So Trevor from St. Augustine, Florida asks, what's it like to be so vulnerable telling your story in public? The openness in sharing your story helps others.
Well, we'd definitely like to thank Trevor for the question and just say that we want to let you guys in on a little secret. We have rebooted this show a few times.
Yeah, a few times.
Just a few. We really just had a conversation about the fact that if we were going to ask other people to come on and share their stories and be vulnerable, that we needed to be willing to do the same. And as you guys can tell, James is what I call our velvet-voiced Zen man. So we just had to have a chat about being a little bit more personal and open because we both, James, don't you agree, we can tend to be a little more reserved folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a more reserved person on this end, I'm for sure.
But we also felt like we had interesting perspectives and stories to tell, and mostly we really wanted to make a space for other people to be able to tell their stories. So we got together and said, okay, we got to go a little bit deeper, dig a little bit deeper here and share our more vulnerable stories. So yeah, it was tough actually for us. It was an effort and a true intentionality. And so we hope you guys are served well by that. We hope that you are hearing our intentionality and that you can join us in that and share your own stories to the degree that you're comfortable and that you feel safe. That's really important to us, that we make that sort of space for you guys. There's a fear factor to it, right? But you do it with your knees knocking and you speak your truth, even if your voice is shaking, and you hope it does just what you just said, Trevor, that it helps people, because that's honestly in the end what we hope to accomplish. And I will say, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. Probably recording more than once helped us both, I think. If you can listen to our old audio files compared to our newer audio files, which, I mean, I'm not releasing those. James might for a certain price. I don't know.
Patreon material.
Hi, Patreon. There's a notable difference just in us getting more comfortable with the mic, more comfortable with each other, because guys, remember, we really just reconnected a few years ago. So, there is a vulnerability here involved in the whole thing, and we hope that breeds other vulnerability, but in a safe space and in a safe way.
Yeah, I think the amount of times we've rebooted and reworked this thing, it's kind of like what you said. I think it was in my second episode, you said something about how, like, the more you live out a truth, the more you do something, the more real it becomes. And so now we're like seasoned podcasters. Maybe that's...
At least we'd like to think so.
It's a little generous maybe, but it feels more real at least.
Yeah, for sure. I like, if I say I'm a podcaster now, it feels a little more real than a year ago. Yeah, that's right, guys. Like, we really started this dream a good year ago. Mm-hmm. So, I definitely think too that it's important to put a human face on the topics that we're talking about, and that's got to supersede, everything else about an issue. So we are definitely here to explore all kinds of fundamental shifts, whether you're moving into something or out of something. We're here to understand what makes people tick and to share more about what makes us tick. And maybe through all of that, we discover something else that makes us tick.
Yeah, definitely.
I would also just want to maybe mention here that James and I have this thing about agreeing to disagree. We're not fans of that statement because we just want to let you guys know that we can agree to disagree any old day about Coke or Pepsi, about cheese pizza or pepperoni pizza. We can agree to disagree on that stuff all day long. But we just want to let you know that you can trust that we are going to stand for human rights every time, and that we do have a line, that we do have some core beliefs that we're going to stand by. I would say in many ways, that's what we're here to do. We're here to give you that safe space to share your vulnerable voice too. And we hope that as we are sharing, that is helping others, but that that as you share, it helps us. And it helps this community of listeners that we're trying to build. I know that's absolutely my favorite part of this whole podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I think the more honest we are with ourselves and each other, and more willing we are to share with each other our stories, we realize that these stories actually connect us in fundamental ways. And similar to what I've said previously, it's just this idea that we're all connected. It's all one thing. And the more we share and open up with each other, the more those connections will begin to reveal themselves, I think.
Absolutely. We're going to put the fun back in dysfunctional, guys.
Yep. So to answer your question, Trevor, and thank you again, it's a really good question. Honestly, telling my story in public for me, it's actually been really freeing to talk about these things and get them out there. And I hope I did it in a way that wasn't flippant or completely dismissive of people that I've known and loved, but with whom I've come to disagree with in fundamental ways. The challenge I've run into is how to disagree with someone in a way that's respectful and civil on the one hand, and yet clearly communicates the importance of why I disagree so vehemently on the other. I also always want to approach conversations like this with empathy and compassion, and in a way that doesn't dehumanize, kind of like we said before. I'm not always successful at that, but I try to be conscious of these things and not react indignantly or out of pure anger. I hope that comes through.
Have you, James, just a question for me. Have you had any experiences like that since we've launched the podcast where someone's come to you or, heard the podcast and you've kind of had to explain yourself, so to speak?
I did get a comment from a family member, and I will share it if I can pull it up here. One moment. Okay, so this comment I received, it says, I want you to know that while there are things maybe we currently don't agree on, you're my family, and I'm thankful to have you. I'm sorry for any way I've handled wrongly the times we haven't agreed. Our experiences are not the same in every regard. The older I get, the more I have begun to understand how important it is to try and see the experiences that aren't mine from a different perspective. I'm just trying to find that place where some things can be reconciled and where some can't. But regardless, I need you to know that I'm thankful for you, and I don't want you to ever feel like I'm a family member who wants nothing to do with you because of what you believe or think.
That's awesome. So do you feel good about that interaction with your family member?
Yeah, I think so. It's a family member that I interact with on a semi-regular basis, primarily through social media, through Messenger, and it's good. I'm glad that he listened, and I'm really happy that it spoke to him in a good way. So I hope you're still listening. If you're out there, thank you, and definitely enjoy our chats. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
So what about you, Grace? Have you heard from some folks, and what have those interactions been like?
Well, I've had a couple of interactions. As most of our listeners, if you listen to the first few shows, you'll know that my immediate family is passed. So my mother, my brother, and my father are passed, but I do have other family members now. Most of them don't speak to me because of coming out, but I do have a family member on my wife's side, an in-law, who surprisingly loves the show. And I was literally bowled over because this person is, pretty religious. So I was just really surprised and honestly grateful to hear that feedback. And it made me feel like the conversations we've had got through, and that there was a connection there that we were able to make beyond our differences. So that was really just a huge blessing. The second one was interesting because that's all it said, is that was an interesting listen. So I'm looking forward to maybe hearing more about that from that family member. If, we're able to speak more about that, I would really like to hear a little more about that. So yeah, I've had a few interactions with folks that I knew wouldn't be necessarily my number one fans, but I'm really grateful to hear that they could at least hear it in a way that didn't make them angry, like you said, that didn't put them off, that perhaps they heard that vulnerability that Trevor was speaking of, and perhaps that, let them hear it in a way that didn't anger or put them off or dehumanize. Maybe my human face on those situations was helpful. I hope so.
Yeah, definitely. I hope so. We have a question here from Chris from Lexington, Kentucky. Chris says, "You are both so earnest and humble. A question I would have is, how can post-religious people recreate all of those good parts of community that we miss from our religious upbringing?"
Well, Chris, you have asked the $1 million question. So first, there must be a Casserole phone chain established. This is number one. Y'all know I love a good casserole, yep. And even the really bad ones with tuna and potato chips. You
really love your casseroles, Grace. And I mean, we've kind of talked about this before, and my experience with casseroles has not been nearly as positive as yours. There's a few good ones here and there, but there's always some really bad ones when you show up to those potlucks. And I've just had a really mixed experience trending toward bad casseroles.
All right.
This is a way we can agree to disagree.
No,
casseroles.
No. Not on casseroles. Casseroles are in the fundamental core belief section. So, okay, it's not the cream of mushroom soup, guys. It's not the green beans, and it's not even the crunchy onion rings.
I like those. Cream of mushroom soup, you can count me out.
Come on, that's where it's at. Those just crunchy onion rings.
Give me a can of crunchy onion rings, and I'm a happy Zen man.
See, even the topping determines the level of the casserole. Like, that's the gold star, right?
Sure.
So let the little casseroles come unto me. I've got an oven set at 425 and a cookie sheet waiting. Seriously, though, it's not the casserole, guys. I do talk about casseroles a lot, but it's what it represents. I do have better culinary tastes, just for everyone's information. I really do. But what it is to me is this funny Southern, representation of what it means, which is that someone was thinking of you. That's what we do in the South. We feed everything. So it's that someone was thinking of you, and that someone cares, and that you belong, and that you're loved. And I know this sounds silly, but I knew I was out of the club when the casserole stopped coming, right? When people stopped showing up to my life with food at certain times, like a death or, even a celebration, a wedding or a birth or whatever. When people stopped showing up to my life from those communities with a casserole, I knew I didn't belong anymore. I knew I was out of the club. And I know that sounds kind of weird and funny, but for me, that was the big signal. Because what makes it all work is what makes it awful, right? It's the awful tuna, so to speak. It's not the crunchy onion rings. It's that we have these communities in fundamentalism where so much of it is based on fear and loathing, right? The things that we hate and the things that we fear. And that's what kind of makes everyone draw together, is that we hate these same things together, we fear these same things together, and somehow it creates this energy of belonging. It's really strange. And that unhealthy aspect of it that makes it feel so good in the moment because you belong to this club and you are loved in this club is very much the thing that makes it so unhealthy and awful and traumatic and abusive, especially for those of us who leave. And all I can really kind of come up with a solution to that for myself is to be healthy, to go and get yourself a therapist and be sure that you get yourself healthy, to find your people and make your own kind of gathering based around what you discover you care about, not what you were raised to care about. And on the flip side, not based on hating what you were raised to care about. Find that thing that's genuine to you, that's authentic and true and really speaks to your soul, and do that thing. And do that with people who also have that same desire and passion, and dare I say calling. And many things can be a calling. What we're trying to do here is create one such space. We want to encourage the kind of freedom that comes with peace, being comfortable in your own skin, and doing the things that feed your soul. And that's why we make recommendations for personal growth and opportunities to get involved, at the end of the show, because we want you guys to be able to say, oh, that's something I care about. I've learned about that today, and I'm, learning that that's something that I do care about, and I want to get involved in that, or I want to learn more about that, because as we grow, we discover there are more things for us to care about and to get involved in.
Yeah. To call back a little to what you were saying about kind of what makes it awful is what makes it work, the unhealthy things, the gathering together and teaming up against certain things, to have that thing in common, that it's basically your little group against the world, so to speak. I keep thinking that isn't that a very evolutionary thing that we've kind of evolved. We had to, at a certain point, team up with each other against this common danger, this common enemy, in order to survive as a species. And it seems like one of those carryovers into where we are now. But at the same time, we've also developed this sense of compassion and caring for one another. And that can also be seen as a survival instinct as well. But now, because we're not in that space of living closer to nature and having to fend ourselves against natural dangers, animals, things like that, we now almost have to create these dangers, these boogeymen that we have to protect each other and go after. And that's kind of that cult mindset that we can so easily get wrapped up in.
Cults have been here from the beginning. It's a way we've tried to understand the world around us.
Yes.
Religion, cults,
Definitely.
How we tried to explain the sun coming up and going down.
Yeah. And I know that, when I was in more religious circles growing up, and I alluded to this in my story, is that I had this compassion within me that had been capitalized on and used as a control device to keep me involved in what that religious community was doing. And it reaches a point where I kind of think of this movie quote, and it's a little bit of a deep cut from a movie called Snakes on a Plane, If anyone's seen that, it's not the quote that you're thinking of from Samuel L. Jackson when he just gets fed up. It's not that quote. It's one that you probably won't remember, but Kenan Thompson's character was on the plane, and he was accompanying someone who was supposed to be a celebrity. I can't remember if he was a movie star or musician, but this character was constantly playing a game, a video game.
It was Mario Brothers.
Okay, he was playing Mario.
No, I'm just saying. I don't know that for a fact. I'm just
saying. I don't remember. But
I'm addicted to it, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm a Mario person too. But this guy was just constantly playing the game, and Kenan Thompson looks at him at one point and says, "Hey, are you playing that game, or is that game playing you?" Yeah. And that to me is so memorable because it's such a metaphor for so many things that we can so easily fall into, to the point where, yeah, maybe we're driven by our compassion and our caring for each other, but at what point is that being played by the game rather than, you know what I mean? Like, you're not using your compassion is being used against you or against other people. So something to be mindful.
I think about that too with like shame, right? Like maybe it's just you trying to be a good or what we might call moral person, right? But then it gets turned into this shame game that ends up playing you. And I would say, particularly for women, that happens in fundamental situations, or people who identify as female, that happens for us in fundamental situations, right? Like if we dare, have a thought that's, just a thought that's quote unquote impure in those terms, or if we don't quote unquote submit, and then those sorts of things are turned around on us as not being a quote unquote godly woman, right? So I think those things can really, I know that for me, when I was in that situation, they really did play me very, very handily. Like, and I think about that as you're saying that with the game. I definitely thought that I was playing it, I think, but it was playing me for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Purity culture is a real big one, and affects women so much. There is a component, of course, that affects men as well. We have this stereotype where it just feeds into this toxic idea of masculinity, where we're the dominant ones and we're the ones that are submitted to, I guess. And there also is this emphasis on, at least for me, there was on purity, remaining pure, true love waits, that whole thing. And there actually was, this idea of impure thoughts, this constant battle that you were fighting against lust, which basically is being attracted to someone is lust, is the idea that you're given. So yeah, it's one of those things that it affects people on so many levels, and there's this idea that in order to be a good and holy person, to keep yourself apart, to be special, these are the things you have to do or not do.
I think too, one thing that's important that I've actually been able to pull back into my life, I would say in the last 3 years-ish, without feeling something weird, is that it's okay to miss some of it. I've been out now for over a decade, but in the beginning, I would sort of feel weird that I would miss some of it, and then you sort of reject everything, and then you sort of come back to this maybe medium pendulum swing. Even if you don't believe, there can still be things that you got that were good out of it, and there can still be things that you enjoy out of it. And I know for me that's only been in the last few years that I've come to some peace with that it's okay for me to think, okay, well, that was a good thing I learned, or that was a good thing that I experienced, and I want to bring that with me along the journey. And I think that as we are building these new communities that Chris is talking about, that it's important that we allow ourselves to bring those things that make sense to bring, the things that are good, the things that were helpful, that we allow ourselves to bring those along the way, and not do this sort of extremist thing. And I think that as you're going through the process, there comes a point where you have to be extremist about it and push it all away for your own health. I think we're just in our human nature, we're like that. It's like I have to get away from it, deal with my stuff, and then I can sort of come back to this balance about it. And I know for me that I've definitely been through that. Like I said, about over a decade, and only in the last, 3-ish years, able to take some joy in the things that I feel like I took from it that were actually good and helpful. But I do think it's also important to accept that it's never going to feel exactly like it did, and that's okay, because maybe it shouldn't, because it wasn't based on the best thing in the world. And I know that's something I've had to really accept in my life. And when I accepted that and didn't try to recreate exactly what that was in a different form, but just tried to be with my people, doing my thing, it was a lot more helpful for me to just accept that this is going to look different now, feel different.
I think everybody has their own balance, right, that they need to find.
Yeah.
When you're moving from one thing to another thing, do you completely throw out what you came from, or is there something about what you've been through that you can still find value in?
Absolutely. And I think we have to be careful that we don't try to recreate it by creating the same group think by just now we just hate it all back. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like we hated all these things. So that made this group, and now we're out of it. And so now we just hate the things that they hated. I think that kind of creates this weird vortex, and we want to try to have some effort to avoid those pitfalls of cults. And so I think that the important thing to me, the one thing I really look for in a group that I'm exploring spirituality with in particular, or ideas, even just ideas and academic ideas, is that there's no personality worship. There's no one personality that everyone is sort of bowing to, kowtowing to, sort of thing, because I think that really is quite the key sign of a cult, right? Like that there's this one person that everyone is submitted to in an unreasonable way.
Yeah. So to talk about your question, Chris, and thanks again for that question. I think I agree with Grace and what she said regarding religious community, in that part of what makes it work is what makes it so awful. We keep saying that's kind of a recurring theme, I think. But there is certainly a cult mindset in the places that Grace and I came up in that acts as a relational glue, holds the community together. There are also more liberal religious groups out there that don't hold everyone to a single standard or belief. On my way out of the Christian church, I attended an Episcopal parish for a while that sort of had that. It was very liturgical, very traditional. They recited the creed and all that, but nobody would care if you didn't play along 100%. Anyone could show up for the donuts and coffee and a discussion class with the pastor, which was excellent, by the way. And nobody was trying to convert you or make you agree with anything. I've also attended very friendly Unitarian churches where there are people of various faith and non-faith practices coming together for singing and talks and potlucks and various community-focused service and social justice action.
Did the potlucks have casseroles?
The potluck scared me off a little bit, so I never went to those, but I imagine there probably are some casseroles there. So, when we're through this pandemic, come down here and we'll check out one of those potlucks at the Unitarian Church.
Great.
I am fortunate. Yeah, I'm lucky to live in a large and diverse city, so we've got those things. On top of all those things, there was also a Zen center that I would visit occasionally before COVID took off. And there's also a local humanist free thought society that meets. Honestly, that's not always my thing, so I haven't really done a lot with that. I do occasionally check out their Facebook or their YouTube channel for some of the talks and the guests that they have. But it is different, though, because anything like what I'm describing would be more my thing than anyone else in my family. And, of course, those church communities that we came from, Grace, they were very much about family.
Yeah.
So even if I had been able to establish myself in one of these local communities that we have, it still wouldn't be the same. It might work for some people, but for me, Since leaving church community, I've been more of an occasional visitor than a member of anything. Honestly, between work and family life and personal pursuits, even without quarantine and lockdowns, I don't feel like I have any time left to invest in a small community. I'll show up, I'll join something that's happening here and there, but that's the most I can normally manage. And I suspect a lot of folks like us are in a similar boat.
Absolutely. I admit for me that I definitely have a daily personal practice, and I have a close-knit circle of friends that we kind of share our practice together.
Mm-hmm.
But that even isn't even weekly necessarily. It might be reading a book together. We are all oracle card readers, so we may, read cards together, those sorts of things. But we don't necessarily, have a service, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with you about that. And I do love my Episcopalians. That is definitely a place I have moved in and out of since I left formally. And, even within the Episcopalian Church, there is lots of room. I even know a bishop who is a Buddhist as well, and Buddha goes on the altar. So
nice.
There's some room there, and there's some movement, and I enjoy seeing that kind of understanding of a more universal take on faith, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And Chris, more to your question, your original question, I think anything that seeks to recreate those good parts of community would have to be very intentional and also very open-handed about things. People will come and go and show up and disappear, but eventually you may get that core group that sticks around. The trick then is to avoid becoming cliquish with that core group, to remain open and accepting of new and more transient folks. Be intentional, but also don't attach yourself to some arbitrary ideal of what it should look like or feel like. It won't be the same as your religious community, and that's okay. Start out with, like Grace mentioned, maybe a book club style gathering or a discussion group or some other thing that can bring people together. Maybe make it a dinner thing as well. Some people like that. And some people will be into it. Others won't. That's okay. I hope that's helpful.
Unfortunately, a lot of times creating these groups, and often people will even say this who are church-going folks, that will say finding a church is like dating. And I would say that, creating these groups is almost like dating,
Yeah.
In the sense that we're just trying to find our people and folks that we have things in common with that we can share together.
Yeah. So we have one more question here from Eddie in Chandler, Arizona. Eddie says, it sounds like you have relationships that have remained from your fundamental days and others that have fallen away. How did you decide who to remain in contact with and who was best not to? Is it based on their shifts or something else?
Well, James, why don't you take this one first?
Sure. So I am pretty tolerant regarding who I keep in my circle because for me, I don't think it's helpful to just cut people off unless it's a self-care thing. And in relatively few cases, I have had to cut people off who became toxic and disrespectful. I had one friend from high school who, when I posted my outrage over the verdict and the killing of Trayvon Martin with the Black Lives Matter hashtag, commented that my hashtag left her speechless and shaking her head. This wasn't the first incident with her, and at that point, I was done. You're blocked. There have been other friends who have unfriended me because of things I said or behaviors I confronted. I was prepared to stay in it, but when I confronted the racism of one friend I had known and loved for over 20 years shortly after Barack Obama was reelected, he told me to keep my liberal BS off his page and attacked me for never thanking him for his military service. And after that, he blocked me and we haven't spoken since. So sometimes those things take care of themselves, I guess. Grace?
Yeah, definitely. I, just to piggyback a little bit on what James was saying, I had one interaction with one of the folks I know he's talking about. I got a similar reaction, you haven't thanked me for my service sort of thing, blocked me and that. There was another family that I was very close to. So my dad was a single dad, especially when I was in high school. and I lived with this family part-time. And when I posted, it wasn't even anything that controversial, really, just about that I thought, we should talk about Jesus loving all people. And it was because of a comment from a politician in Alabama. I just got this major pushback about I thought you were a godly woman. How could you say that? That was really hard for me and very eye-opening that I couldn't say,
Jeez.
Jesus should love all people without there being this terrible pushback. And this person had ended up going in the service as well. And that's not all service people. I know plenty of liberal service people, so I don't want to put a liberal conservative thing on it, but just that he was just very offended, and I didn't know how to take that. And so I ended up meeting with the family one time after, and it didn't go very well. we tried, but it didn't go very well. And I was, I had learned from my family, my biological family, that sometimes my choices had those sorts of consequences. But I honestly thought from these people that in my mind I had chosen as family that they would love me no matter what, right? Because they were chosen, because I chose them, and I thought they chose me. But I learned right then that could be conditional in some cases. And particularly when you're talking about fundamentalism, it can be conditional. And that was a really hard lesson for me, because I was actually older, at the time. I was sort of maybe halfway through college. And I still hadn't quite grasped that some of these choices I was making and some of these things I was discovering about myself were going to really cost me. And that was one of the things along the path that really showed me that those things were going to cost me. And it definitely made me stop and think for a minute about my relationships. Which ones to keep? Do you just cut everybody off now? What do you do? Kind of thing. And for me, I'm more like James. I stay fairly open, and I judge everything on a case-by-case basis. I'm very much in line with what the UU, or Universalist Unitarian Church, says, which is deeds, not creeds. And I tend to take people on what they do more than what they say, because we can all say some really stupid shit and still show up and do the right thing. So I tend to be a little more in that boat. And if people are doing the right thing, and if they're treating me well, I tend to stay more open to it. It doesn't mean I'm going to agree or condone or wholeheartely support, but I will stay open to the relationship, and I will let it be sort of like a bridge. And, we're free to come and go across that bridge. And sometimes that bridge gives us the much needed space that we need. I am rarely ever do I really just burn that bridge down. That's really not my style. But I have, for personal safety reasons and for boundary reasons. And there are times if someone is really unsafe and they are not respecting your boundaries, you just have to do it. And it sucks. It absolutely sucks. So I would say for me, my boundary is, how are you treating me? Are you growing? The deeds part of the deal, not the creeds.
Yeah, but definitely take care of yourself first. I would say that is of utmost importance, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're of no good to yourself or anyone else at that point. And that, I think, to me, is a guiding principle, in that, as a person of privilege, I need to use that privilege in the best way I can. And that, to me, includes maintaining relationships with people that I vehemently disagree with on a lot of things. But if at any point that becomes unhealthy, traumatic, something that is hurting more than helping, then sometimes you reach a point where you just have to let go.
Absolutely. And for me, those have been few and far in between, but I think about it now, they were pretty heavy on the front end, so to speak, because then the older you get and the more you build healthy relationships, the less of that you have to do, right?
Yeah.
So I think about that, and like those really heavy sort of drop-offs, so to speak, were definitely in the first years of me coming out as queer, but also is not Christian and those sorts of things. So, then you get older and you start to build relationships with more open-minded people, and you don't have to do as much of that letting go because you're now building the right relationships. But I would also say there are people that are worth keeping. And for me, one thing I think about is that I do have some people in my life who we don't necessarily agree, but they keep striving with me. They keep talking to me, asking me questions. They want to know more. They want to understand more. And that's something I can get down with, right?
Yeah.
And I've always said I don't like the idea of situational ethics because I think all ethics are situational. And we were talking about this a little bit before the show, James, and I think that plays into this a little bit in that I think every situation is case by case, and I think everything is sort of person by person. And I also think that it's about, is that person growing, right? It's not about where you are, to me. Mm-hmm. It's about where do you want to go, and are you making even a baby step toward that? And if you are, we are good to go. And if you're standing still in it, are you doing that for a reason? And if you know you need to get out of it, are you asking for help? Because I've been in all of those positions, so I totally understand that there are times when you feel like you can't make a step. But are you okay then asking for help? Or is there maybe a reason you need to stand there for a second and you're being clear about that? Just the growth aspect of it is really important to me.
Yeah. I think I take a bit of a more, I guess I'll say, Zen approach to those types of relationships.
Okay, Velvet Boys.
But what I do is I try to not put too many expectations on those relationships, but rather see the value of that relationship in that they're still within that circle of contact and influence. And whether they're progressing or moving in a certain direction is not necessarily a parameter that I set on that relationship. But if I'm still in their life, is that better than the relationship not being there? And that can sound a little bit like, oh, I'm so great that I'm in their life. That's not really what I mean. It's just that the fact that everything that we come into contact with feeds our consciousness in a certain way, right? So the people that are in your life, the kinds of things that they say and do to you or for you can make or break a lot in terms of your awareness and the way that you see the world. So that's
I'm definitely talking about people that I'm close to in that context.
Okay.
So I want to make that a little bit more clear. I'm definitely talking about people in my life who I know I don't agree with strongly in some areas, but I'm still close to. So I totally get what you're saying. I agree with that with people who may be on the social media or, you know what I'm saying? Like in the more outer areas of my life.
Yeah.
But I was definitely referring to that with so I would ask you, does that apply to people that you have close to in your life?
Honestly, most of my relationships right now, and this may even be true even if we weren't in the midst of a pandemic right now, but most of my relationships with people, my interactions with people outside of the workplace, of course, which now for me is virtual as well, but most of my interpersonal relationships are on a remote basis. It's all social media based. People are either messaging me on Messenger privately or interacting publicly or semi-publicly on things that I post or share. So when I'm in that situation and we're having these public or semi-public conversations, the way I like to see that, especially if it's a back and forth discussion about something that maybe we don't agree on, I do my best to remain cognizant of the fact that it's not just us, the two of us having this conversation, because there are other people that are watching, that are listening, that are observing, maybe not commenting, but they're still there. They're scrolling through the news feed and they stop and they see this conversation that's taking place. And so to me, there's still value in relationships like that, because I'm probably never going to convince this person of a certain viewpoint, but if we're having a conversation and I'm doing my best at presenting where I'm coming from, then maybe someone on, some outlier who's watching or reading will be able to, maybe it'll help them shift somehow. And so as far as people that I'm close to in my life, face-to-face, in-person relationships, then I probably would set some more parameters on that, just because that has a greater potential to become toxic because it is so close physically. So yeah, absolutely. I think if it's an in-person relationship with someone, I would probably be more likely to avoid them if that relationship takes a certain turn than I would necessarily be with a remote relationship if it's over something like social media.
Yeah, I definitely think we're talking 2 tiers there, right?
Yeah.
So to Eddie, I would say there's really different standards for different tiers. Like you were saying, if it's someone more personal in your life, there's maybe more boundaries. If it's someone on the periphery of your life, there's maybe less boundaries.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Well, guys, thank you so much for the questions and comments that you wrote in. This really is our favorite thing, to interact with you guys. We want to just keep that conversation going, get more conversation going. So now that you've heard from us, we want to hear from you. And here's how you can reach us. On Facebook, just search for Fundamental Shift.
On Twitter and Instagram, find us at FunShiftPod and at fun.shift.pod, respectively.
On the web, you can find us at funshiftpod.com. You can email us at funshiftpod@gmail.com. And you can leave us a voicemail or text us at 704-665-7473.
Please subscribe to the podcast, rate and review us on the platform of your choice. Your feedback means a lot to us. It lets others find us more easily and helps us know more about the content you're looking for. Tune in next week when we explore decolonization with Ana Gelsi Velasco Sanchez.
Until then, folks, remember, shift happens.